Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is our fourth Fenwick Elliott webinar of 2021. My name is Stacy Sinclair, and I'm the Head of Technology and Innovation here at Fenwick Elliott. Today, we are discussing BIM, digital technologies, digital transformation in the construction and energy industries. So I just wanted to begin with, back in October 2020, you might have seen the McKinsey report, which stated that investment in construction tech had more than doubled over the past decade. And this is just one sign that these technologies are really set to radically change the landscape of the industry. And indeed, some already have. And so we're pleased today to discuss some of the issues and challenges in this space. And I'm delighted to be joined today with my colleagues, partner Jeremy Glover, who many of you will recognize from our previous Fenwick Elliott webinars, and Senior Associate Mark Pantry, both of which are specialists and experts in construction, energy, and infrastructure projects and disputes. So before we begin, just a reminder, please do ask questions as we go, and we will take as many of them as we can at the end. And you should by now have found, hopefully, the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and where you can submit those questions. And rest assured that the slides today and on-demand recording will be available on our website within the next few days after today. So to move on to the agenda for the next 14 minutes, we're going to start with enabling BIM in the UK, then moving on to the digital transformation and in particular issues surrounding data. And then finally, Jeremy's going to cover digital twins and design. But just to begin with, before we crack on into enabling BIM in the UK and how to do so successfully, I just wanted to note, I'm rather wedded to this diagram from that same McKinsey report I mentioned. And I just wanted to note that BIM is just one piece of the jigsaw. You can see it there at node 16. And it's sitting alongside a number of other technologies on this technology map. And that's going to include 3D printing, robotics, digital twins, drone-enabled inspection technologies, real-time monitoring, controls, and a whole host of other ones on this diagram. So it's no longer just a conversation about BIM. There's a number of other issues arising around data and otherwise. And I would suggest that these technologies are really set to enable a better built environment. But to do so, their success and utilization requires close collaboration and communication and a number of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And to understand when these issues arise during the course of design, construction, commissioning, and the longevity of the asset. And one important element that I'm going to touch later on, which underpins all of these technologies, as I've just mentioned a moment ago, is the data and the information that's really critical to each of this. So Mark, in a second, is going to take us through how to successfully implement BIM in a UK context. But just to get everybody on one page, what is BIM? I'm not going to go through BIM, but it's notoriously difficult to define. Some people think of BIM as a Revit model. Others might think of it as a Revit program, AutoCAD or whatever one might use. Others think of it as just a 3D model. Some might begin to discuss it as a workflow, a way of bringing information together. I think possibly, considering that I found that the 2037 third edition of the Oxford English Dictionary is set to have 645 definitions of the word run, the UK construction industry can be forgiven to find it difficult to define BIM. But here I'm sharing on this screen the definition from ISO 19650, which Mark will touch on, in that what we're talking about today is a shared digital representation that facilitates design, construction, and operation processes to form a reliable basis for decisions. So historically, we had 2D drawings and even we still do today in some aspects, 2D drawings with designers and contractors handing over little more than as-built drawings at the end of the project. And now we're moving into more of a world of 3D models with connected and embedded data and information to operate and maintain the asset or the building to the end of the project and beyond to maximize performance and sustainability. Here's another definition from the expert guru Fred Mills. It's about information models, but that connected data, including the common data environment, where this data, much of which is residing. Now, this diagram, which you can find on his website, shows you that it's about graphical information and non-graphical information combined together in a connected way. So you have potentially manufacturer information, installation data to assist with the lifespan of the asset that's connected. Now, you might have heard terms such as 3D, 4D, 5D, or 6D BIM. This relates to the data and the platforms that potentially might be being connected to those models and to those workflows. So 3D BIM largely is likely to be about geometries. 4D BIM moves into time and scheduling. So they're adding scheduling data or platforms so you can generate more accurate programming data for the project. 5D BIM, cost estimation and budget analysis, and 6D BIM, this is where parties are moving into facility management and sustainability, linking attribute data so that you can support that facilities management. So you're going to have details about components, their manufacturers, when it was installed, when does it require maintenance, so people can react to better performance. How are you going to operate at optimum levels, and what is the expected lifespan on particular components? So there's well-documented reported benefits of BIM, and again, the perceived challenges of BIM. And to address some of those challenges, thankfully, we have the UK BIM Framework, which deals with the design, build, operation, and integration along that journey. And now I'm going to hand over to who will kindly take us through enabling BIM in the UK. Let's see if we can get this to go.
Thanks, Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, how do you get BIM on your project? As Stacy was saying, the best place to start is probably the UK BIM framework, which sets out this overarching approach to implementing BIM in the UK. The UK BIM framework itself is a kind of umbrella organisation. It's brought together by the UK BIM Alliance, the British Standards Institute, the BSI, and the Centre for Digital Built Britain. And while there is a kind of dazzling and confusing array of organisations behind it, what they've actually produced, it has achieved its objective in creating a kind of coordinated approach for the integration of BS EN ISO 19650. That's a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to say 9650 or ISO 9650 from now on, just so I don't have to say that every time. The intention of the UK BIM framework is to develop a single set of guidance which is presented clearly and concisely, relatively concisely to the extent that anything in relation to BIM can be concise. The next slide sets out that guidance, but the UK BIM framework is intended to be a kind of one-stop shop for UK BIM, and this guidance framework, which is kind of set out diagrammatically below, is updated regularly. And in fact, last week there was the quarterly update, which updated the guidance for information management, but also included an updated guidance for the protocol template, which we'll come on to shortly. So what is ISO 19650? Why do I want it on my project, and is it BIM? Well, the answer to that is it isn't BIM, but instead it's a series of international standards of good practice, and it defines information management principles and requirements for design, for delivery, for operation of an asset. And the 19650 standards replace some of the existing British standards relating to BIM, quite similar to the PAS 1191 series, which it was kind of built upon. So ISO 9650 is part of the landscape of national and international standards supporting information management processes. So on that basis, ISO 9650 is wider than BIM, as it includes all information on a project. So that would be the construction program, minutes of meetings, certificates, and if you think of the amount of information that a project generates daily, even just by monitoring email traffic, you can see that you need processes in place to manage that information. And ISO 9650 sets out the best practice so that that information could be managed in the best way. And as Stacy was saying, BIM is a part of that, in that it provides the methodology to assist the structure on how information is, it provides a structure on how information is gathered and how it's used. And using the same standards, using ISO 9650 across the project or nationally or internationally, will only create efficiency savings, and it makes that information that's generated and used more valuable. So I've set out here the kind of structure of 19650. The first parts were published in 2019. Part 1 sets out the kind of concepts and principles. It's your introduction, it's your primer to information management. And part 2 gives the detail, the particular requirements on how information is to be managed, particularly during the delivery phase. Part 3 was then introduced last year in 2020, and that's managing information during the operational phase. At the same time, Part 5 was introduced, and that's security-minded BIM. Whenever you're sharing information, you might inadvertently lead to the exposure of sensitive information. That's probably more of a concern if you are building a prison, for instance, than residential accommodation. But at the same time, any sharing of information carries with it a certain risk of loss of that information or misuse. So the intention of Part 5 is to reduce that risk and hopefully reduce the impact of any safety or the safety or security of the assets by having that information shared. The more astute among you will notice that there's no Part 4. We're still using the British Standards 1192 Part 4 for that, which is about collaborative product information. So these are truly international standards, but they do need to be adapted for a particular reason, for a particular region, sorry. On that basis, the ISO 9650 has national forewords and national annexes, and these set out regional specific requirements for the way in which information is managed. So for example, here in the UK annex requires that information is classified using Uniclass. In other jurisdictions, another classification method might be used. I've put up this diagram here because I think it's quite helpful really to explain that the parties and also the terminology that's used, particularly when we go on to talk about the information protocol in a second. But it shows the kind of clustering of parties and how they are all interlinked. Going on to the information protocol, this was published last year. Having an information protocol is a requirement of the ISO 19650. This version, which was published by the UK Bim Framework again, built on the pre-existing CIC Bim protocol, but expanded it so that it works with ISO 19650. The information protocol has this kind of information particulars at the front, which are filled out on a project by project basis. And that's where you see again the terminology that aligns with 19650. But again, you need to fill this out on a project by project basis, and also consider all of the clauses in detail. While it is a standard form, it is a template and can be expanded upon or amended as a project sees fit. Clause 3 of the information protocol sets out the obligations of the appointing party. And that, again, is something which the parties need to check and they need to consider, particularly in relation to, for example, a JCT design and build contract. This obligation in clause 3 might be putting more requirements on an employer than they initially consider. So again, it's just a template, but it's one which can be used and built on to deliver the specific requirements for a project. Clause 5 sets out the common data environment and how that works. And again, we're seeing this more frequently, that employers and all parties want to know who can access the common data environment and what happens if there's a dispute. The relatively recent case of Trant Engineering and Mott MacDonald was around that, where access to a common data environment was revoked effectively. So parties want to know that they are able to access information when they need to. So how do you get the information protocol into a JCT contract, for instance? Well, in the JCT contract, you have this idea of a Bim protocol. It's in the contract particulars. So the information protocol, as amended from that template, can be added in the definition of Bim protocol there. You'll see from the definitions in the JCT contract that the Bim protocol is a contract document, and the contractor is obliged to carry out the works in accordance with the contract documents. So that's how it's incorporated into the terms of the JCT contract. Similarly, with the NEC contract, you've got optional clause X10, which is about information modeling. And again, that's where you would insert the information protocol as amended for your particular project, and you would add it in there in the works information. You'll notice here that the NEC goes a bit further than the JCT, and it adds additional liability onto the client in relation to the information provided in the information model. So if that information is wrong, then the client is liable and not the contractor. That can be passed off effectively to the consultant. So if a consultant provided some wrong information, the client would bring a claim against the consultant for that wrong information. So hopefully that's bringing together a kind of brief overview of ISO 19650 and how it can be incorporated into your contract.
Thanks very much, Mark. So we're going to move on now to a bit more about the digital transformation and data. And Mark touched on some of the issues there actually with the common data environment and so forth. So if I go to what I'm going to cover in the next few minutes, what is here and now in terms of construction technology, what's on the horizon, and what are some of the issues that we're seeing of this data that we've been sort of harping on about, and what are some of the issues that one needs to be alive to. So going back to my beloved diagram here, the digital technologies that are already a reality, we are already seeing, as many of the audience might already know, robotics, whether it be bricklaying or otherwise, drones for scanning purposes in potentially dangerous or hard to get to areas and over expansive areas. So drones for a number of other reasons as well. The connected job site, 3D printing, digital twins, which Jeremy's going to come on to in a minute, and smart buildings and AI. And underpinning, as I said, all of these technologies is data. And Mark referred to just the sheer amount of data that you're going to find on a construction and energy project. Drone footage, photos, texts, emails. We have Teams chats now, turnstile data, the common data environment, weather records. Everything's feeding into this sort of mega data lake that's being consumed on each project. And so really, it's about the success of these projects. What data do you have? Is it good data? Is it the appropriate data? And is it connected data? And these technologies are really finding their way with that. Now, Jeremy will touch on digital twins, but that's a good example of you need that real-time data, those sensors, which are going to be critical to this success. And understanding what data you need in advance is ever so important. Now, some of the technologies on the horizon, I might suggest perhaps are not as far off as we might think. Some possibly skeptical, but smart contracts, possibly smart clauses to start with, and blockchain. We're starting to see elements of that already now. So what is a smart contract or a smart clause? This is something that's going to automatically monitor and execute and enforce a legal contractual obligation through the use of computer code. So if in the event of X, Y will happen. So it's no good if you require human intervention to make a decision or to push on that next event. Now, an example of this actually is something called the weather ledger that Digital Catapult is pursuing and progressing at the minute with a number of other parties. And in this situation, you have the Internet of Things and the distributed ledger technology to automate the execution of the weather-related clauses in standard NEC contracts. So you have sensors on site, data and databases are collected and connected. Now, in this project, they're not looking to automate the entire contract, but rather an element of the weather-related clauses. So I'd suggest that perhaps we're not as far away as we perhaps once thought with smart contracts and blockchain. But the importance of data, as I've highlighted, and the significance of it and the management of it. So we're seeing much more collaborative tools now to improve this management and the workflows, even just with our clients, how we as lawyers work with our clients and other project team members. And the two issues I want to just touch on quickly are access to data, as Mark touched on, and data usage and expectations. So we need to consider during the course of the project and afterwards such things as who has the right to access the platform, and even in the event of non-payment. So the case there of Trent Engineering and Mott MacDonald, which Mark referred to, that was a case where Mott MacDonald had not been paid, so had revoked access to the common data environment. I think parties are becoming more alive to this now and considering these issues in advance. Who's hosting the common data environment? What's going to happen to that at the end of the project? Will that platform exist in 6 to 12 years' time when potentially maybe a dispute arises? You know, where is that data and who can access it at that point? Have you backed it up? Is the software actually available to be able to read those files? Issues to consider. Now, and do you have the right to use the data or a database? Now, this case here is not necessarily a construction case, but I'm just referring to it because as we move into innovation, developing products that may be specific for a project or otherwise, we need to consider whether or not the databases and the data that are being connected, you've got the right to use that. So in this case, the question was whether or not 77 infringed the Ordnance Survey's database rights if it had any. So not all data may attract database rights. So in summary, 77 meters used 18 databases from different sources, several of which came from the Ordnance Survey. And the judge held that the Ordnance Survey did have database rights as it had substantially invested in the verification process. I won't go into the details of this, but it's just pointing out that whilst your standard form appointments and construction contracts will deal with licenses and copyright and so forth, as we expand into new technologies and innovation, those issues are likely to become more important in terms of copyright, intellectual property, and otherwise. There we go. And this is what's getting at that as well. Do you have a particular right over a database that you've created? There's a more recent case right there for you to have a look at. Again, not a construction case, but these issues are coming up now time and time again. And it's important to understand what the licenses are on a project, both express and implied, and prior to embarking on be it a new technology or innovations or otherwise. So the last case I just wanted to refer to, and the last issue, is data usage and the use of it and the expectations of it. I think there's perhaps a perception that data is the source of truth. Perhaps, but you might have various different data sets, each saying various different things. And what people think it should be used for and what they expect it to be used for may not be aligned with the other parties. So in the case of Premier Engineering versus MW High Tech in 2020, Premier provided labor to MW and was charging on an hourly rate. Long story short, Premier considered that it was underpaid by 1.3 million. And on this project, so Premier had timesheets evidencing what they say were their hours and labor. And there were turnstile records as well, but those, none of that, well, to an extent, aligned. So eventually biometric clocks were introduced. Now let's just say all three sets of data told a different story. And the question before the court, which eventually it got to, what data was to be used to evidence those hours worked? Was it the timesheets, the turnstiles, or the biometric clocks? And the judge, considering the facts, basically there was an agreement effectively between the parties that the timesheets and biometric clocks would be used to calculate the payments. So the moral of that story is that we need to get it right at the outset. Perhaps one party's expectation of data is going to be not aligned with another's, and getting that brief right at the outset is ever so important, and embedding that in contract documentation and the alignment of mindsets. Early communication and indeed involvement of the legal team, which perhaps not all projects necessarily do at the outset. So I'm going to move on to now hand over to Jeremy with one particular digital twins, ever important and rising technology.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stacy. So just to finish off today, we thought we'd have a quick look at digital twins and also some of the issues that you need to think about in relation to design generally. As Stacy said, digital twins are all about capturing data. But one thing they're not is they're not the new kid on the block by any means. The concept's been around since at least the 1960s. NASA was using basic twinning ideas for its space program. And we've all seen those, and we've all seen or most of us have seen the Apollo 13 film. Stacey's also helpfully provided us with a definition of a digital twin. And it's important to think about, remember, it's not just about construction. Heidelberg University Hospital, they've got a project about the digital twin of the heart. And what they want to do is make use of digital twins to make sure that to improve the way they treat the patients, try and treat the patients in a more targeted way. And it's exactly the same principles using there for sort of heart treatment of people with heart problems is with looking at buildings. Completely opposite example, the Microsoft regional headquarters at the Fraser Building in Singapore. It's a living building. It's a live building. Data's collected from Bluetooth beacons and lighting and air quality, excuse me, and temperature sensors. And these data points are then consolidated to enable Microsoft to monitor the facilities and energy usage to try and make the building more efficient, which is good for the environment, and of course that there will be a financial impact as well. And that's one of the reasons when promotion for digital twins, like with Bim, there's considered to be a savings that can be generated through the use of making a twin. There can be faster project delivery. If you can monitor what's happening digitally, there may be a need for less changes. Less changes are good. Change tends to lead to delay and additional costs. And of course, that's one reason why the government is promoting the development of a national digital twin agency. It was the government mandating of the use of level 2 BIM that was a big mover in moving digital design forward generally in the UK. And digital twin effectively, I suppose it's a bridge between the physical and the digital world. It's a link between what's actually being physically constructed, or it's a link to your heart in your body, and then being monitored in a digital way. And Mark's already drawn attention to the work that the Centre for Digital Built Britain have been doing, and they're very involved in the development of the National Digital Twin. You can see there they're talking about digital twins being a realistic digital representation of the physical asset. They're using the digital twin to monitor performance, to predict performance, and it can lead to savings, it can lead to improved performance. And it's all about the collection of data, either as the building is being constructed or as the building is being lived in and operated. You can help plan and test buildings as they're being constructed. And you don't actually have to be physically present. So maybe that you know, there are improved safety and security issues. But I suppose inevitably you want to know, what about legal issues? Is the world of digital twins something where lawyers are going to get in the way and put up lots of obstructions and sort of come talking, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that? Well, to be fair, most lawyers aren't like that. And again, the CDBB, they're alive to the issue. The November, December 2020, they held a series of legal roundtables to start considering some of the legal and contractual issues that people need to think about. And there's a useful summary of the what they were discussing on the CDBB website. And ultimately, moving forward, they're going to consider looking at legal drafts, guidelines, processes, and contract models. But some of the issues that they highlighted, maybe there is a gap in governance. Who owns what? You've got a number of different concepts. You've got the physical building, you've got the data being transferred through sensors, and you've got who's actually going to be using the data. There is concern about the contractual landscape. And if you do want to have a look at the key legal issues, that the fundamental legal issues that people need to be thinking about legally and contractually, the Winfield Rock report, which has been out for 2 or 3 years now, is still key reading. And usefully, Sarah Rock is one of the key leaders of the legal roundtable at the CDBB roundtable. And also, Stacy was talking about the importance of licenses. She referred to the software solutions case and the need to ensure that all the licenses implied and actual are sorted out before you get going. And that's because there's still this uncertainty around intellectual property management. And that's not just a digital twin thing. Yeah, I think it's a digital thing. It's a digital design thing. People are concerned because there's a lot of new ideas about, and people want to preserve and protect their rights. But I think the thing you need to be thinking about, there's a lot of, this slide there, it's talking about, well, are the current standard forms, are they going to work? Is there uncertainty about liability? And it's things that people need to think about. But at the end of the day, what you need to be doing is planning at the outset, making sure you have a clear understanding of what you want to achieve. And then has that message been brought across to all the people involved in the project. I mean, to take one idea, and again, Stacey's already highlighted the importance of the digital twin sensor. And the sensors are the bridge, as I've said, they're connected to the physical product. They actually collect the data. They send the data back to the digital twin. But you've got two different things here. You've got the things physical that are being constructed, and then you've got the things digital. And although they're inextricably linked, they're not necessarily, the briefs for them aren't necessarily the same, because they're coming from two different sides or two different ends of the equation. So some thought needs to be given right at the outset to how you join the two concepts together. But what I think is interesting, when you see and you listen to people talking about digital twins, we're seeing a number of similar questions arising, the same type of questions that people were asking back in the day when BIM was still universally called BIM. Is there a distrust of working collaboratively? And that people are thinking about, what about security, competition, quality of data that Stacey's being talked about? It all comes back, as I've said to the beginning, what do people want? And there's a real danger that people assume and expect different things. You need to understand what's expected. And this all comes back to the fundamental principles of design. It's all about getting the basics right, understanding the fundamental principles, and then you have a stable platform to move forward, whatever type of contract you're using. And, classic, why do disputes arise? It's because people don't understand the contract. Arcadis every year do these series of very, very informative reports about what are the main causes of disputes: errors and omissions in contract documents, failure to properly administer the contract. Well, that's all about a failure to understand what your contract is all about. And with things digital, it's all about the design. It's all about the brief. You need to go back to the basics, understand what you want to achieve. Now, Mark's very usefully been talking about the information protocol for use with 19650. This is what the information protocol says about the basic design duties. The required design standard means the level of skill and care applicable to your obligation under the appointment. Now, it talks about the party's equivalent obligation under the appointment, because one of the key issues, one of the most important things the drafters of the information protocol have sought to make clear is that design information comes from many sources. And the idea is that the information protocol should be incorporated across all the project appointments. That could be client, contractor, consultants, suppliers. It makes common sense, to be honest, because you want to ensure that all your contract documents are aligned, that everyone is required to use the same standards, required to use the same data. But as you say, the design duty is the duty under the contract. And of course, you've got to remember that different contracts say different things. Under the FIDIC Yellow Book, the design obligation is fitness for purpose. NEC form of contract, it's more akin to reasonable skill and care. But you've always got to remember, it's not just what the standard words are. You need to delve deeper into your contract documents. What does the scope say? Works information, the employer's requirements. And to take the NEC4 form of contract, the contractor provides the works in accordance with the scope. And the scope is information which describes the works, sets out what a contractor is supposed to achieve. And the minute you start talking about requirements that a party is expected to achieve, you're moving away from reasonable skill and care into fitness for purpose obligation. So you need to delve into what you're actually being required to do. The scope documents, employers' requirement documents, quite often they're based on standard documentation taken from other projects. There could be several documents drafted by different contributors in different ways. And that means there are conflicts in terminology. That means there is duplication with contract provisions. There could be contradictions with contract provisions. Now, I know that this webinar today is about things digital, but this matters, all this type of thing matters on any project, whatever the state or knowledge of the digital awareness of the parties. Nothing changes just because you're using one of the modern methods of construction or some fancy digital design provider. But what other things do you need to think about? Just highlight on this slide here 2 or 3 of these issues, but the fundamental one you need to think about is the importance of the design brief. And that's nothing new. There's an old case from Northern Ireland involving I think it's called Stormont, Maine, involves a dispute between a client and the architect about a games room. Was the games room intended to be for recreational games only or suitable for top class competitive snooker? It wasn't. When the building was completed, you couldn't use it for top class snooker because of space constraints. Now, in making a design, an architect has a duty to exercise care to ensure the design should be effective to achieve a client's purpose. So if you're unclear as to what your client's objectives are, you need to take steps to make sure there is clarity. And that's, again, it's fundamental to all these, all the digital design issues that we are talking about. What are people trying to achieve? Are people actually making it clear what they want to achieve? When it all comes down to the fundamentals of contract risk management, it doesn't matter what contracts, protocols, guidance notes you're using. Understand your obligations, liabilities, and limitations. And that holds true, you know, any contract. And just because everyone's talking about, everyone's getting carried away about all the great things that the digital design, BIM, digital twins, whatever it is, can achieve, don't forget the basics. Understand that with digital design, as with any issue, the devil is in the detail. Now, John Egan was saying over 20 years ago, the importance of integrating design with construction, the importance of investing in high quality design by an integrated team. It's exactly the type of things that everyone is talking about today when they talk about the implementation of BIM, when they talk about the working with digital design, digital twins, and everything else. So I suppose my message is, the important thing to remember is, yes, we're talking about new concepts and everything, but when you're talking about the legal fundamentals, the key contract issues, is there really anything particularly new here? We are talking about technology, but we're also talking about how you manage and deal with the technology. And I think that's something that's been recognized by the final thing I want just briefly to mention. I do no more than mention the government construction playbook, which you'd have all seen came out 2 or 3 months ago. And there's some key policies. A number of those relate to things digital, but they also stresses the importance of people, the importance of successful relationships. Now, people and successful relationships aren't actually one of the policies, but they're an important part of the playbook and any construction project generally. I think that's something that's very easily forgotten when we talk about things, digital things, design. And people are the people who draft the contracts. So to make sure you talk to each other, understand what you are required to achieve, and you're a long way to making sure that things are going to work successfully for you. I think that's pretty much all I was hoping to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I hope the audience, you found that hugely helpful. I certainly have. In respect of digital twins, I think it's time. I think we would definitely have time for some questions, and I just wanted to pick up on some that are coming in. And thank you, audience, for sending in your questions as we've gone along. Some of the questions that have come in are evolving around large projects, multiple data sets, and parties keeping multiple copies of multiple data sets, and can we do anything about that? And I just wanted to start with that because Jeremy was touching upon the collaboration, the integrated team, and where do we see this going? You know, what can we do about this? I think it's really about, I mean, it's planning at the outset. I think, and it comes down to trust and what have the parties agreed. I do understand that there are technology providers out there who are helping to address this issue of accessing data, holding data, that will alleviate some of these issues. But as Jeremy was just mentioning, and Jeremy, I don't know if you want to add to this, but It's about understanding what the parties have agreed and what they want to do with that data. And as I think we see the increase of digital twins, smart buildings, there's going to be a lot more data, and being able to, store a copy just for yourself is pretty unlikely to be possible in time to come. So certainly issues to be addressed. Jeremy or Mark, I don't know if you want to add to anything on that.
Yeah, I mean, Stacy, I mean that's absolutely right. I mean, there was a case in the TCC a couple of years ago, and I think there's an architect who did things old school, and they had a notebook, and in that notebook were lots and lots of pieces of paper and notes with little things scribbled on, and if you held the notebook up, everything fell out. We've all done that. We've all got things, and the problem was you couldn't organize it and recreate what had happened. But if you imagine that what happens now on a major infrastructure project, the amount of data you have, and if you haven't thought about at the outset how you're going to organize that data, you're going to have just the same as the old-fashioned architect's book, and you'll have 47 copies of one thing, but the crucial bit you need, no one can find. Absolutely important, crucial.
And didn't the judge in that case refer to it as the his black book is the tumble dryer of information or something like that? And now I think we are facing the sort of electronic tumble dryer of digital information.
Not careful. Too much information. What do you do with it all? You can't actually.
And you can see how people, particularly if you're going to be risk averse, you don't have, maybe the project just gets up and running, you haven't actually thought about some of these data issues. You're going to be facing some of these issues. Thank you to the audience that you've been raising in the questions box. So just moving on, some questions, Mark, one directed for you. Moving back to BIM and the information protocol, you spoke about incorporating the information protocol into JCT and NEC contracts. Does it also need to be incorporated into subcontracts and consultant appointments?
Great, thanks for the question. There's a quick answer, which is yes. For some subcontractors, it might not always be appropriate. If there's a small package value or type, then it might not always be appropriate for that subcontractor to be expected to comply with the information protocol. But for main subcontractors and for consultants, absolutely. And that's how the information protocol has been drafted. Appointee can be a subcontractor, it can be a main contractor, it could be a consultant. For consultants, it's the incorporation of the information protocol that's the challenge. The JCT and the NEC have made it easier because they're standard documents, but consultant appointments are generally more bespoke terms, so that some consideration has to be given to make sure that the information protocol is incorporated into that appointment.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I think I can tie together a couple of maybe one last question, but pulling in together a number that we've had from the audience, and it concerns BIM compliance, BIM implementation. Is the industry really using BIM, and how do we see this going forward? I suppose I'll start, and maybe Mark and Jeremy can chip in. In my perspective, I think you've got different levels of maturity and implementation of BIM depending on what sector you're in, which jurisdiction you are in the world. There's probably less uptake in certain industries, and other industries you're seeing clients requiring smart objects embedded in their deliverables. So a very wide range of maturity. Mark, Jeremy, do you want to say anything about what we're seeing in terms of BIM implementation on projects, disputes?
I mean, we're seeing it a bit at the front end, advice on how do I set it up in the contract, like the previous question. How do I make sure that a consultant is required to comply with the information protocol? And then you see some queries as a project develops sometimes, particularly in relation to issues that crop up. So, for example, if a contractor was terminated partway through for a job, what happens with the information that's been provided, who deals with the license for the common data environment. Those are the kind of queries that are coming through quite frequently. On the dispute side, Jeremy, Stacy, I'm not sure that there's that many, other than the fact that most disputes involve some element of information management these days.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Mark. We're not really seeing, or if you like, on the dispute side as such. We do see queries emerging of the type that you've just mentioned. Whether that will still be the case, I don't know. But yes, it's there, and it's all about. But what people are primarily interested about is what Stacy was focusing on, and that's the data, and the information on how that's used.
And just to answer on the first point of that question about whether BIM is being used, most of the kind of industry statistics and questionnaires indicate that there's been a huge scale of increased uptake in BIM, and that it is being used. So I think it is being used, and we're certainly seeing more queries about it.
And I suppose whether you call it BIM or the use of digital technologies to design, construct, or commission your building, you're going to face these sorts of issues that BIM would inevitably capture. But thank you very much, Mark and Jeremy. I think that's probably all we have time for. Thank you very much to the audience for joining us today. It's been fantastic that so many of you could join us. I just want to move to discuss our next webinar in 2 weeks' time. We hope you can join us. We are going to have our Fenwick Elliott Edward Foyle, as well as Barrister Richard Osborne of Four Pump Court, and they are going to discuss the do's and don'ts of creating and retaining privilege. So that's in 2 weeks' time, same time. Thursday at noon. So we do hope you can join us then. But thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. And I think that's all from us for today. So hope you have a good rest of the week and stay safe wherever you might be. Thank you very much.